almost certainly by process of elimination, I am correct in saying that our final presentation this evening is an MFA presentation. Silk only distinguishes us, early modern clothing and cotton.
That helped create early modern drama. In recovering Shakespeare's theatrical vocabulary, Alan Desson outlines his objective to, quote, emphasize the building blocks of Shakespeare's vocabulary that are foreign to modern literary and theatrical ways of thinking, end quote. Shamelessly copying Desson's model, I wish to explore the building blocks of early modern clothing that are foreign to our modern eyes by deconstructing early modern clothing pieces in order to explore the importance and influence of clothing culture on the early modern stage. Understanding the importance of early modern clothing culture can inform dramaturgical research and also help clarify how clothing culture affected early modern theatrical productions. My project explores the practical application of dramaturgical research regarding material culture through the reconstruction of early modern clothing pieces. My argument is that the study of the original practices of clothing, or novelty, I guess it might be, is vital to the research and study of early modern social and cultural history and can also help inform modern practitioners. I, along with a handful of very gracious volunteers acknowledged in your program, constructed 2 early modern outfits entirely by hand, using patterns from Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion and from Jean Honeysett's Period Fashion for Stage and Screen. Janet Arnold was a costume designer and clothing historian who specialized in the creation of accurate scaled patterns based on the surviving clothing pieces from the 1560s to the 1940s. Jean Honeysett is a British costume designer who most notably designed the costumes for Elizabeth R., a miniseries starring Glenda Jackson. It took roughly 900 hours, yes, hours, to pattern and construct both of these outfits by hand. I began on October 13th, 2008, and only reached completion a few days ago. For this presentation, my actors, Dawn and Jeremiah, will dress in these 2 reconstructed early modern outfits, while Chelsea, Christine, and Sarah will serve as my tarring men and help dress Dawn and Jeremiah in order to physically illustrate another element of clothing that is lost on us today. Early modern dressing was a social event that required several individuals to assemble an outfit. It took a lot of time to train both my tarring men and actors how to dress quickly, and we will have to begin immediately and take a few shortcuts along the way in order to finish this presentation in 30 minutes. This means I will have to explain some of the historical and logistical aspects of early modern clothing culture as we go. Okay, so my models will display each handmade layer. I will show you an image of the portrait or extant garment on the PowerPoint that inspired the pattern, and then give a brief example from Shakespeare's plays in order to illustrate how the works of early modern playwrights recorded the culture of clothing in their written works. Let's go. Okay. The smock or shirt is the innermost layer and the most basic garment for both sexes. Men wear shirts while women wear smocks, although the silhouette for both is loose and relatively unstructured. Thank you. In the early modern period, this was the most intimate layer and was only seen when the individual was in a state of undress. The linen layer also absorbs the oils and odors of the body and is the only clothing layer that can be laundered with water. In Romeo and Juliet, Mercutio sees the approach of Peter and the nurse and says, "A sail, a sail." Benvolio replies, "Two, a shirt and a smock." Early modern ship sails were made of linen, and Benvolio plays off Mercutio's literal identification of sail material by identifying the approaching characters through their linen underclothes. Peter, a male in a shirt, and the nurse, a female in a smock. The linen layer and the stockings are the only layers of clothing that have direct contact with the person's skin. Early modern stockings, just as these, seen here on Jeremiah, were knit by hand from linen, wool, or silk. and as you can see, are tied on using garters. And as you like it, Jakes comments on the situation of an older man whose clothes no longer fit by stating, his youthful hose, well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank. In general, an early modern individual would put on shoes after donning their shirt and stockings, because the following layers of clothing restrict motion and movement and make bending over slightly difficult, as you will see. But for this demonstration, Jeremiah will add his shoes after getting dressed. Typically, both men and women wore flat shoes in the early modern period, although men would wear boots for horse riding and battle. Men would wear their doublet and trunk hose directly on top of their shirt. Doublets are tight-fitting, high-necked garments for the upper body and are worn closed with the help of buttons or hooks and eyes. Breeches, or trunk hose, are short garments for the lower body and are tied to the doublet using points, which are long strips of fabric, which you see hanging down from the sleeves at the moment, that go all around the waist of the individual. These points are actually hidden by the tabs, which is why you can't see them. For the sake of time, the silk doublet and hose are already attached, making it easier to dress, and as you noticed, Jeremiah had to wrap his shirt around his lower body in order to fit the long undergarment into his breeches. Doublets accentuate men's upper bodies and create long, lean lines, while breeches, in conjunction with stockings, highlight a man's leg, in particular, the calf, which was considered an alluring part of the male body during the early modern. I should also mention that in the early modern period, black was a very expensive color, reserved for a person's best set of clothes, simply because it was so expensive to produce. Early modern sleeves are cut with a pre-shaped bend in the elbow, as you see, and are worn high up in the individual's arms high. Both of these elements mean that a man has a limited range of motion in his arm. In a relaxed position, the arm has to be kept at almost a 90-degree bend, because straightening the arm completely creates stress and pull on the tight-fitting sleeve, as Jeremiah so lovingly demonstrates. This bent arm posture is exactly the stance commonly seen in early modern portraiture. Early modern sleeves were sewn directly to the doublet or attached using points, which is what we're demonstrating here on Jeremiah. Upper-class men, just as women, had servants to help dress them and attach these various parts of their outfits. In Antony and Cleopatra, Antony chastises Cleopatra and tells her, "To flatter Caesar, would you mingle eyes with one who ties his points?" This indicates that a dresser is a necessary, although perhaps not a highly revered position. I cannot emphasize enough that during the early modern period, it was considered improper to wear a doublet open, revealing the shirt. To open your doublet is to reveal your most intimate clothing layer, reserved for your bedroom to the world. In the early modern period, some individuals would wear their clothing open, but these individuals were typically mad, lovesick, or melancholy, all considered states of mental unrest in the early modern period. In As You Like It, Rosalind instructs Orlando how to appear like a melancholic lover when she says, "Your hose should be ungartered, your bonnet unbanded, your sleeve unbuttoned, your shoe untied, and everything about you demonstrating a careless desolation." In today's terms, going out with an open doublet would be the equivalent of going to work in your bathrobe. Yes, some people do it, but it is not considered appropriate behavior, and these individuals are generally viewed as unbalanced in some way. All right, now that Jeremiah is done with the rest, let's get to Dawn. Oh, I got over here. Okay, Dawn. To the loose smock underlayer, a woman adds underpinnings, such as a corset, farthingale, and pad. Dawn, this is likely right there. Okay. These pieces are made of linen, like the smock. The farthingale has white willow rods inside, while the corset has wooden pieces sewn in between the various layers. Early modern women wore corsets, farthingales, or bum rolls to create a specific silhouette. Corsets flattened the breasts, and farthingales expanded the hips. These items are tied onto the body, and any early modern actor playing a female character, be a young boy or older man, would need these undergarments to create the proper silhouette. Corset, as we understand the term, was not used in print until 1795, and during the early modern period, this type of stiff undergarment was called a pair of stays or a pair of bodies, sometimes shortened simply to bodies or bodies. After these undergarments are attached, the petticoat goes over the farthingale in order to give weight and shape to the form. In the case of this particular petticoat, the center panel is made of silk and is seen as part of the outer garment. Over the petticoat, the woman adds a dress or body skirt combination. The pattern for this silk dress comes from Honeset's pattern, which is based on the Ditchley portrait of Elizabeth. Unfortunately, There are very few extant early modern dresses available because most of these dresses were cut up and reused due to the large amounts of fabric available in the skirts, which means that Honeyseth's pattern is purely conjectural. My dressers use straight pins to pin the silk stomacher directly onto the corset and then pin the dress onto the stomacher. Like men's clothing, sleeves could be attached to the bodice or tied on using points. These sleeves are attached. As soon as the stomacher and dress is in place, the dressers will then sculpt and pin the extra long skirt onto the farthingale in order to create soft pleats of fabric. Dressing in this type of upper-class outfit was a special skill performed by at least 2 or 3 ladies' maids, but early modern theaters employed tiring men and wardrobe keepers who would need to know how to dress a woman properly for the stage. I do not know where theatrical companies found or trained theater personnel, or if they were men or women, but there is no doubt that in order to create the proper effect on stage with regards to clothing, the theater would need individuals in their company who knew how to dress someone to look like an upper-class woman or man. The 1609 Bill of Complaint against the establishment of the Whitefriars Theater lists the theater's backstage staff and makes specific mention of a bookkeeper, tireman, and a tirewoman, which illustrates that such individuals were necessary for the day-to-day operation of an early modern theater. No full records exist about the backstage staff of an early modern theater, but 19th century theatrical economics held that the wardrobe keepers were the highest paid members of the theater staff, receiving a set salary rather than a weekly wage, which denotes a specialized level of expertise. And as you can see, expertise is certainly involved. While they continue to pin Dawn into her dress, let me explain the logistics of creating a piece of clothing. Any tailored piece of clothing, early modern or modern, begins with a pattern. In the early modern period, patterns were held by tailors, and in the mid-1500s, tailors began to print some of their patterns into books. This image illustrates 2 examples of a Spanish pattern book printed in 1618. The image on top is the pattern for a man's outfit, and the bottom pattern is for a woman's dress. Each pattern gives only the most basic instruction for scaling and assembling, and is not intended to instruct those not trained in patterning. It is important to remember that clothing pieces were made to order, and that garments worn in the early modern period were made for an individual person. In Two Gentlemen of Verona, Julia, disguised as a boy, tells Sylvia about Julia's physical appearance, and she says, "Our youth got me to play the woman's part, and I was trimmed in Madame Julia's gown, which served me as fit by all men's judgments as if the garment had been made for me. Therefore, I know she's about my height." In the early modern period, clothes were specifically made to fit one particular form, which made it all the more surprising when borrowed or second-hand clothes fit well, as the 2 gents example shows. Tailors specializing in off-the-peg, pre-made clothing did exist in the 1600s and onwards, but they were generally viewed with mistrust for selling cheap, poorly made garments. Tailoring clothing is a time-consuming process that involves a variety of steps, which I will briefly cover. First, you have to create a pattern. Cut it out in inexpensive fabric, sew it, and fit it on the model. Then you need to fit this mock-up on the model. Take in areas that are too tight and let out areas that are too small, in order to give the proper fit, and repeating as often as necessary. Finally, you cut out the pattern in the final expensive fabric, in its individual components, i.e. sleeves, front, back, side. You cut out the lining, inner lining, which is needed to add weight to the fabric, and outer lining for each component. Then you pin all the layers together and sew them by hand, again, as individual components. Once these individual components are finished, then you put them all together to make a finished garment. Because all of these pieces are finished as components, you can remove and interchange pieces easily, take out sleeves, change stomachers, fronts and backs, that kind of thing. Now Dawn is almost dressed, and you can see how early modern women hid their forms through these various underpinnings and layers, which is quite different from today when women reveal their silhouettes through their clothing. Even casual clothing such as jeans and a t-shirt fit close to the body and do not obscure the silhouette in any drastic way. In this outfit, thanks to the farthingale, you cannot clearly see Dawn's silhouette. She takes up a lot of space. And at the same time, she limits how close people can actually get to her under all the layers. In the early modern period, men emphasized their forms. Women hid theirs. This is an important fact to keep in mind when thinking about moments in early modern plays where female characters were shown in some state of undress. Like men, a woman would not appear undressed unless it meant something with regards to her mental or emotional state. All right, I'm going to move back here so you can see the two of them. Although they may seem fully dressed at the moment, these two individuals are still incomplete because they do not wear ruffs or cuffs. Ruffs or cuffs. Ruffs or cuffs in the early modern period, people used linen and lace to identify and distinguish class. But even the lower classes would consider ruffs and cuffs an important element of dress, even though they couldn't afford the finer linen and lace and bigger ruffs and cuffs of the upper classes. The pins used to keep the ruffle shape point in towards the neck and in towards the wrist, and then these ruffs and cuffs are then tied. They would also have been starched, which unfortunately these are not due to time constraints. Unfortunately, I am not a milliner, so I cannot show you an early modern hat, which is important to complete the outfit, especially for a man, and cover the head. Hats were a vital element in early modern dress because you only uncovered your head for God or your superiors. Even in this hatless state, however, these two outfits are still relatively plain and simple compared to outfits seen in early modern portraiture. Dawn, in a few moments, will put on a female ruff, or a rebotto, which is a stiff wire frame covered with lace. And we haven't gotten there yet, so we're just going to kind of move on. They're going to get there soon. Okay, so in a few moments, my actors will present as seen in their outfits, but right now, I need to give you a little more information about clothing culture. In the early modern, there's the rebotto. What's going on right there? It's very cool. Okay. In the early modern period, color, cloth, and cut held a wealth of information with regards to social rank, gender, religious affiliation, national identity, and emotional state. I do not wish to deconstruct the semiotics of early modern dress at this time, but I need to emphasize how prevalent the culture of clothing was in the early modern period, and how the information we've taken several minutes to present would have been common knowledge to an early modern individual. Are you almost done? Yes? Great, thank you. They're going to go backstage. Yeah. Shows that his theatrical company ordered clothing from tailors, mercers, and lacemen on a weekly basis. But it is important to keep in mind that many members of early modern theater companies were also experts in the culture of clothing. David Kathman's study of free men and apprentices in the Elizabethan theater reveals that of the 80 documented free men and apprentices working in the early modern theaters, 34 of these men claimed association with clothing and fabric guilds, as either weavers, drapers, mercers, haberdashers, or merchant tailors. There is not enough concrete evidence to suggest that all of these men were fully trained in these trades. The important fact is that they identified themselves with these clothing and fabric guilds, and therefore, most likely, had some insider's exposure to the expertise associated with these guilds. For example, there are 34. Thomas Heywood, Anthony Munday, Thomas Middleton, and Francis Langley were drapers. Thomas Webster and Francis Walpole were merchant tailors. Philip Henslow was a dyer and invested in starch making. These men were involved in the theater on a daily basis, but they also had some connection to the clothing and fabric trade, and would most likely have understood subtleties of clothing that we cannot possibly fathom. As I discussed before, there were clothing experts backstage too, but even early modern audiences were experts. The average audience member who was not part of the clothing guild would still have understood subtleties of cloth, color, and cut, because explicit sumptuary laws made such information common knowledge, even if such practices were not enforced. For example, one small portion of the sumptuary statutes from 1574 reads as follows: "None shall wear in his apparel silk other than satin, damask, taffeta, camlet, and doublets, and sarcenet, camlet, or taffeta in the facing of gowns and clothes, and in coats, jackets, jerkins, coifs, purses being not of the color scarlet, crimson, or blue, furfoins, grey genets, and others as the like groweth not in the Queen's dominions, except men of the degrees and persons above mentioned, sons of a knight or son and heir apparent of a man of 300 marks land by year." Okay, honestly, these descriptions may mean little to a modern viewer's eyes, but early modern individuals would have to have understood the distinctions between 8 different fabrics and fibers, 8 different articles of clothing, and 3 separate colors listed in this short paragraph. On our models, you only saw one type of fabric, silk, and you only saw 3 colors, black, gold, and blue. So keep in mind modern silhouettes, early modern silhouettes that you saw a few moments ago, and let's look at these pieces in action in the play Hamlet. Pay attention to the state of Jeremiah's clothing when he appears next. His doublet is open, his stockings are down, and he does not wear ruffs or cuffs. This state of undress follows Ophelia's description of Hamlet. His doublet all unbraced, no hat upon his head, his stockings fouled, unguarded, and down jogged to his ankle, pale as his shirt. Observe how this contrasts to how you saw Jeremiah dressed a few moments ago. I asked Don and Jeremiah to present Act 3, Scene 1 from Hamlet, because hopefully it is a familiar scene that people have seen before, but perhaps never in this particular context. This scene is not about clothing or costume, but even in a scene where clothes may not appear to matter, you will be able to see how early modern clothing affects performance of the early modern plays. Let's set this up right by creating the proper setting. Luckily, we have a wonderful setting here at the Blackfriars. Here, the audience is relatively close to the garments and can appreciate subtleties of cloth, color, and construction that might be lost or muted on a large proscenium stage. To further help this demonstration, we need to lower the lights. Maybe? Yes, thank you. Wonderful. To better illustrate the stage of natural lighting that would have occurred on the early modern stage. Artificial lights affect the color and shine of cloth, sometimes altering the elements of a fabric drastically. For an early modern audience, clothing would appear either in daylight or candlelight, which is why we have the lovely candles on stage. A factor that can be easily forgotten to modern eyes used to seeing clothing under artificial lights. While you watch the scene, please keep in mind the information that comes across through the clothing. Consider how the clothing helps emphasize the distinctions of gender, class, and mental and emotional state during the performance. As I said before, Jeremiah in particular has changed his costume since you saw him last. Look for how the changes in his costume inform specific information about his character. Watch the posture of Jeremiah and Don. In particular, notice the way they hold their arms. Remember that 90-degree bend I was talking about, like that. And see how much range of motion they actually possess as they go throughout this scene. Also notice the silhouettes of the two characters in comparison to each other, the differences in gender or rank, their physical proximity, and how they move and behave on stage.
Fair Ophelia, nymph, thy orisons be all my sins remembered.
Good, my lord, how does your honor this many a day?
I humbly thank you. Well.
My lord, I have remembrances of yours I have longed to redeliver. I pray you receive them.
I never gave you aught.
My honor, lord, you know right well you did. And with them words of so sweet breath composed has made the things more rich. Their perfume lost, take them now again. For to the noble mind rich gifts wax poor, when givers prove unkind. Then, my lord.
Are you honest?
My lord.
Are you fair?
What means your lordship?
That if you be honest and fair, your honesty should admit no discourse to your beauty.
Could beauty, my lord, keep better commerce than with honesty?
Aye, truly. The power of beauty will sooner transform honesty from what it is to a bawd than the force of honesty can translate beauty into his likeness. This was sometime a paradox, but now the time gives it proof. I did love you once.
Indeed, my lord, you made me believe so.
You should not have believed me. For virtue cannot so inoculate our old stock that we shall relish of it. I loved you not.
I was more deceived.
Get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? I am myself indifferent, honest, but yet I could accuse me of such things that it were better my mother had not borne me. I am very proud, revengeful, ambitious, with more offenses at my back than I have thoughts to put them in, imagination to give them shape, or time to act them in. What should such creatures as I do crawling between earth and heaven? We are errant knaves all, believe none of us. Go thy ways to a nunnery. Where's thy father?
At home, my lord.
Let the doors be shut upon him, that he may play the fool nowhere but in his own house. Farewell.
Oh, help me, sweet heaven.
Or if thou dost marry, I'll give thee this plague for thy dowry. Be thou as chaste as ice, as pure as snow. Thou shalt not escape calumny. To a nunnery. Go. Farewell.
Oh, heavenly powers restore him.
I have heard of your paintings, too, well enough. God has given you one face, and you make yourselves another. You jig, you amble, and you lisp, and you nickname God's creatures, and make your wantonness your ignorance. Go to! I have no more on't. It has made me mad. I say, The rest shall keep as they are. To a nunnery. Go.
This short scene illustrates the various types of information that can come specifically through the clothes the actors wear on stage. The silhouettes inform you immediately about gender, and the silk fabric denotes two high-class characters. As Hamlet, Jeremiah appears in black, which is consistent with his state of mourning, but he is also unbraced and unpinned, which denotes an altered mental or emotional state, which is arguably an improper appearance for an individual of his rank. You not only see Dawn as Ophelia in her expensive dress, but you also hear her as she moves around on stage in her long silk skirts. She is relatively constricted in her movements because the corset and farthingale limits her range of motion. She cannot bend over easily and instead must carefully drop to her knees, which makes it difficult to get up or down easily when she wants to pick up the letters. During rehearsal, Jeremiah expressed a desire to stand next to Dawn to show some intimacy between the two characters, but her clothes limit how close he can actually get. Dawn also responded to Jeremiah's state of undress and came up with the idea that it would be interesting if Ophelia tried to refasten Hamlet's doublet in order to express that she felt impropriety regarding his manner of dress. Again, these are choices made specifically because of the clothing. Hopefully the performance you just saw is different from other performances you may have seen before of this scene. Productions that choose a modern or specifically non-early modern period setting use clothing and costume to help inform the audience about the characters as well, but it is important to consider how choices made with modern or non-EM period clothing affects the visual interpretation of the characters. Here are a few images of contemporary stage productions of Hamlet, arguably produced from a variety of budgets. Notice how these images in some way alter from the early modern performance tradition. These Hamlets appear in dark colors for the most part, but do they look rich? Does their clothing express a sense of mourning? Does the clothing specifically invoke an understanding that they are mentally or emotionally unbalanced? How about Ophelia? In all of these images, she appears in white, but what do the clothes convey about her character? Does she have high status? All of the images look very similar to help convey how contemporary productions of Hamlet follow a certain stage tradition, even though it is not necessarily an early modern tradition. In effect, the costume designs for these productions replace the visual information contained in early modern clothing with a new set of semiotics that help convey information about these two characters to the audience. Hamlet is in black, Ophelia is in white. That is all. But for an early modern audience, clothing conveyed so much more on stage. The information presented here has hopefully served to illustrate how important, intricate, expensive, and time-consuming clothing was on the part of the early modern company. As this MFA program has shown, it is vitally important to understand the function of early modern playwrights, the composition of theatrical companies, the logistics of rehearsals and memorization, and the indoor and outdoor playing spaces that house these performances. I would argue that along those lines of inquiry, it is vital to understand the function of early modern clothes on stage. Since we cannot easily replicate early modern clothing, it does not usually fall within the parameters of original practices or Shakespeare's staging conditions. And I believe that is unfortunate. In our world of cheap, ready-made, easily accessible clothing, finding handmade, specifically tailored clothing is considered couture, something extremely fashionable and intended only for the very rich. In the early modern period, all clothing was couture, because every piece was an investment of time, money, and resources that depended on a skilled labor force. Early modern practitioners were experts in clothing, and they understood that while a play was heard, it was also seen. I do not wish to insist that the only way to perform early modern plays is in early modern clothing. This discussion and demonstration of early modern clothing is suggestive, not prescriptive. This is not the only way to approach an early modern production, original practices or not. But this program aims to marry stagecraft and scholarship, which is exactly the aim of this project. The articles of clothing produced for this presentation are the result of the craft of sewing, a stagecraft, but they are also the result of scholarship and research conducted with an eye towards dramaturgy and the material culture of early modern theaters. I argue that clothing is a vitally important part of the stagecraft scholarship equation. As my actors will tell you, these clothes are heavy, hot, constricting, and they affect how you move and carry yourselves. My dressers will tell you that it is time-consuming and intricate process to dress people in these outfits, and it takes planning, expertise, and cooperation. cooperation. And you have all seen how clothing affects movement and performance on the stage. Let me close by repeating the proverb from the beginning of this presentation. We are all Adam's sons. Silk only distinguisheth us. This is not just a nice saying. This is a statement that clothes matter, and we need to continue to explore why they matter in order to better understand the culture that helped create and foster early modern drama. Thank you.